So essentially what's happening is there's a small smartphone rival in China that's asserted Apple's iPhone products infringe some design patents. These are patents that are directed to the way a device looks, kind of the curves, the way that it appears, not any of the internal functioning of the phone. They asserted this patent against Apple in a Chinese court and were granted an injunction, which essentially would require Apple to stop sales. Apple is appealing the decision, but the question looms whether or not Chinese courts will have the authority in the future to ban future sales, whether additional rivals are going to come after Apple for the same or similar legal claims.
Yeah, but does Apple face, any sort of immediate sales threat?
Possibly, right? But likely not, though. And I'm kind of curious to hear from Matt about some of the attempts that Apple has made here to do well with the government, to be good with them. I mean, Tim Cook went to China. They invested in this Uber rival, right? Is any of that going to mute some of this impact at all on possible sales declines in China?
I think the goodwill may offset that a little bit. It's difficult really to tell what the appeals courts are going to do. U.S. companies really haven't faced a situation, especially in tech, where a Chinese court has granted a big injunction on a marquee product like is at stake here. I mean, the patent is actually directed to some features that are on some of Apple's older devices. So even if the injunction moves forward, there's not going to be a huge impact on next generation and new generation iPhones. But, like you said, Apple's made a huge investment in China. It's been working a lot with the Chinese government. Apple's global strategy has been focused on playing well with the host nations. And so I think that some of that goodwill will carry the day, but ultimately these are legal proceedings that take anywhere from a couple years to 4 or 5 years to really play out. So, the focus on whether or not these patent infringement suits will wind up sticking Apple with an adverse judgment, I think kind of depends on each individual case. But, Apple has certainly positioned themselves well to be well regarded by the Chinese government and appeals courts.
So, Matt, we typically don't think of China as a place where intellectual property law is enforced particularly. Is this a change in the tide, or is it a one-off?
I think it is a change in the tide, or it's at least an indicator of some of the progress that's been made over there. There was a long time where U.S. companies considered China to just tread on intellectual property enforcement rights. There was kind of this mantra of don't send things to China because they'll get ripped off, and you have no way to enforce your intellectual property rights. And I think China has made a big effort in changing that, and you're starting to see that play out now. Enforcement in the courts, there's a rule of law when it comes to intellectual property protection. So although this is bad news for Apple, I think if you're a smartphone manufacturer or somebody who's looking to enforce your legal rights in China, this gives you a little bit of hope that maybe there is a changing of the guard, and moving forward you'll be able to protect innovation and inventions and unique design characteristics in China.
All right, Matt Larson, our Bloomberg Intelligence litigation analyst, thanks for joining us from Washington, D.C. And Betty, this is something you're going to be talking about tonight on the launch of Bloomberg TV's first live U.S.-Asia show, Daybreak Asia.
That's right. I mean, this Apple story is actually the perfect kind of story that we will be covering on Daybreak Asia. And the reason why we're launching this show, which is a relaunch of the morning program on Bloomberg Television, is that, look, guys, investing, even though I know you're counting down to the closing bell, okay, investing does not stop at 4 p.m. It continues, and for many of our viewers, they have a global approach to investing, right? They're looking not just at companies and markets here, but they're looking at those in Europe and also in Asia, which is a growing market. So we're relaunching this morning program, and we're going to tie all the U.S. stories to the Asia stories to give our viewers unique context.